Hey BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac, here with Dan of the Weird Book Club with part 2 of our discussion of Nina Leger's The Collection, translated from the French by Laura Francis. Well, Dan, I loved your commentary so much, and you noticed so many things that I didn't notice consciously. For example, that we don't even really find out what she does sexually. Very few references to, does she just look at it? Does she lick it? We know it goes into this memory palace, and that just started to really bug me. The repetitiveness of that, of putting it in our memory palace just in the second half. I was so sick of that. And yes, I think that a novel about a urologist would have been more interesting. Oh my god. So yeah, I didn't get anything more out of the second half. I noticed that she talked quite a bit about reading, and there was a long passage from page 78 onto, I think, the top till the end of that chapter on page 80 about her reading sexual literature and finding it disappointing. She, or the writer... Oh, you asked about the narrator. I think, Dan, that the narrator is just a literary narrator. There's no other character here. But I agree with you that there is some distance between the omniscient narrator and... what's her name? Is it Laura? Jean. And Jean. There is kind of a takedown of how sex is usually treated in literary fiction. And I found myself nodding to some of it, nodding off to the rest. And I wrote that the critique was fairly persuasive, but is this the only alternative? That women wanting sex in literary fiction was a flaw in the woman's character, and that there often was some kind of redemption and liberation from sexual desire. And, you know, I'd have to think about it some more, but fair enough. But then, what the hell is this? I would rather read a shapely literary novel that represents sex poorly. See the sex and literature tag going around. Dan, are you going to do it? The tag, that is. And this piece of crap. I mean, this is the most boring book that I haven't bailed on in more than 10 years. It's just boring from start to finish. Then there are quotes from novels, and I did Google them because I was looking for something interesting to think about while I was suffering through the second half of this. There's 3 quotes, I believe, from 2 different novels. J.G. Ballard's 1974 novel Concrete Island, which is about a man in modern times whose car crashes off a bridge or something and lands on an island under the bridge, and then he is stranded there, a la Robinson Crusoe. That didn't shed much light for me. And then the other one is William Gibson's Neuromancer, which I haven't read, and nothing about that ever made me want to read it. But what is it about? It's some kind of genre fiction, isn't it? Sci-fi, that's why. 1984, cyberpunk. Set in the future, the novel follows Henry Case, a washed-up computer hacker who is hired for one last job, which brings him up against a powerful intelligence. As I sit here, reflecting for the first time on what those plots might have to do with this, the only thing that's coming to my mind are that all 3 protagonists are completely isolated, just from what I'm gathering from those very brief plot synopses, in their world. And I felt a glimmer of interest when what was his name, Victor? He forces her to listen to him talk about himself personally at the end of their hotel room tryst, and she finds herself, she never experiences anything that would come close to resembling a human emotion, but to the degree that she feels anything at all, she feels a bit of anxiety about getting attached to somebody with a name and a story. That didn't go anywhere. This was a phenomenal waste of time, and did it add anything to my appreciation for the penis? That would be a big no. Time to watch some porn. Dan, over to you. Oh, and by the way, I have a large sculpture of a phallus that I got off eBay 15 years ago, and I have lost it in my apartment. I'm going to have to talk to my husband about that. Where the hell did it go? I was going to use it as a bookmark to one-up you in the phallic object department, but my house is a mess. What can I say? It'll turn up.
Oh, hi, weirdos. Dan Rossbach here, your co-lead discussant at the Weird Book Club. Welcome to the special quarantine edition of Shawn and I's discussion of The Collection by Nina Legere. Now, doing my part not to diminish the world's supply of medical masks, you can see I've been forced to improvise with a few items of clothing I just happen to have lying around the house. And of course, in the grand old gay tradition, I was able to find a variety of color options to better complement the day's mood and ensemble. But of course, that's not what we're really here to talk about today. It's probably evident from my highly timely commentary here that I'm recording my half of this discussion significantly later than when Shawn shot his. I've kind of been in quarantine hibernation mode lately, but generally speaking, all is well. And what better incentives to lure me back down here into my dungeon than a conversation with a good friend and a discussion about penises? Now, it's probably pretty obvious from what you've heard from Shawn and I so far that neither of us was finding this book particularly relatable or rewarding. But I have to say now, boy were we ever proven wrong. In this era of social distancing, I now sincerely regret my previous dismissal of our narrator Jean's quest to build an intricate memory palace to house all of the penises that she has known. If only I had her foresight, you can be sure I'd be spending many a quiet, cloistered evening here at home, proudly strolling through my memory palace's phallus-strewn hallways. But alas, beyond this expert survival tip for sluts in seclusion, I still didn't feel like the second half of this book really had much to offer. Now, if the collection can be said to have any particular project in mind, I think it lies in the portion of the story that Shawn pointed out, where Jean is sort of reviewing and critiquing the typical roles women are assigned in erotic literature, or really in most books where a woman dares to pursue her desires outside of prescribed social boundaries. The reader is titillated with the idea of this woman brimming with lust, seeking to satisfy her sexual needs at any cost. And then, at the end of the story, to return us back to the normal world, circumstances conspire to punish this woman in some way, through loss of status, reputation, or even her own life. Kind of a high price to pay for a good lay, if you ask me. So I kind of got the sense that in writing this novel, Legere was out to prove that there was some other winding middle path between forbidden love that dare not speak its name and wild unrestrained hedonism that effectively dooms the protagonist. So it's like, yes, I'm going to give you a lot of the ingredients you expect to find in erotic literature, but I'm going to orchestrate them in such a way that it's just going to make you feel real weird. Like tons of gratuitous sex scenes where no one seems to enjoy themselves. Entire chapters spent describing a casual cruise through the local sex shop. Sampling from the cornucopia of racist, misogynistic stereotypes available on practically any porn site. Yes, it is finally revealed in this second half that Jean is willing to explore, shall we say, synthetic alternatives to her object of obsession. But somehow, nothing seems to satisfy her like the real thing. There's some kind of basic material quality to this process of acquiring new penises that just can't be replicated outside of a person-to-person interaction. But instead of just having Jean kind of accept her kinky lifestyle for what it is, it really felt like Legere was trying to resist this concept of conclusivity. Is that a word? Conclusiveness? So instead of a definitive ending where, the world sort of exists as it is, people kinky live here, they're not widely accepted, but they get along. What we get instead feels more like a dissolution of the general sense of the world at large, almost as if everything was sort of collapsing inward as it's being funneled through Jean's perceptions. There's this vague suggestion that Jean's particular pickup technique, where she pretends to sort of collapse and a passing horny dude comes to help her and they go back to a hotel and, do what they do, that this might actually be symptomatic of some severe physical disorder that actually might take her out one day. And then there's this one encounter where we seem to see Jean almost faltering a little bit in her commitment to making sure that all of these sexual encounters are completely emotionally and personally detached. This one kind of charming seeming guy leaves her a business card and she actually makes an effort to pick it up and save it for later. Well, it turns out this dude is actually a porn director. And sure, why not? Porn seems like a perfectly plausible way to have lots of sex without any risk of emotional involvement. But while we're sort of tantalized with the idea that one of these events might lead to an exciting new evolution in Jean's way of life or exploring her sexuality, alas, everything just sort of dissolves in an indecisive haze. Like, here's a passage from almost the end of the book describing this sort of sensory overload that Jean is experiencing in what seems to be like a trendy dance club. Suddenly, the spots of color quiver, become denser, reorganize themselves according to the coordinates of an invisible grid. Details disappear. The picture arranges itself into squares, captures the bodies in a mosaic of cold pixels. Then one of them flickers. 1, 2, 3. A pointless presence that detaches from the mass and abruptly disappears. Another body follows it. 1, 2, 3. Disappears. Then another. 1, 2, 3. Then the next. Bodies disappear one by one. The wasteland takes hold. Then the place itself disintegrates. The promenade no longer exists. The stairs, the path, and the ceiling thin out to white. The line of the horizon shrinks in one stroke, leaving just a checkered map, like the gaps left after all the faces have disappeared. Only Jean remains superimposed, the single component in a shot, her position clear. She flickers, the signal weakens, vanishes. Silence. Black. So yeah, kind of the one concrete fixed reference point we have at the center of this novel is Jean, who's essentially this like psychic and emotional black box who occasionally emerges from isolation to suck a dick or two so she can think about it later. Wow, now that I say that characterization out loud, it seems somehow familiar. But anyway, if we're supposed to be intrigued by the mystery that is Jean at the center of the story, I guess I'm not sorry to say that I'm actually acquainted with many real-life, engaging, interesting people who share her interests, act upon them, and offer much more in terms of intellectual and erotic stimulation. And so, here at the end of this discussion, the mystery I'm really most concerned about is, what happened to Shawn's giant penis statue? Seriously, Shawn, now that you're trapped in the house, you have no excuse not to track this down. And display it proudly to all of YouTube. Alright, Shawn, weirdos, that's all I have to talk about today. Time for me to return to my normal isolation routine. If you've read the collection and have strongly differing opinions, we'd love to hear about it in the comments section down below. If anyone has recommendations for other books about penises that are far more enriching and rewarding than the collection was, well, I think I speak for both Shawn and myself in saying that we'd love to hear about those too. Alright, until next time, happy reading, weirdos.
Up in the head, suck it, then look in his eyes. Then the next day I might leave him on red. Ay, pop it, pop it.